Hello, I'm Montse Alvarado. EWTN News In Depth is next.
Pope Francis announces the Vatican's foreign policy goals for the year. What ambassadors to the Vatican are saying after their annual meeting.
The point is that, the Church is called to evangelize the world as it is today.
That diplomacy in action. My sit-down interview with the Apostolic Nuncio to the United States, Archbishop Christophe Pierre, goes on the record.
This small Catholic church in Dawson Springs, Kentucky, completely destroyed by a tornado, but there's still reason for hope. I'm Mark Irons. We have that story coming up.
And we're on the road with first-hand accounts of how faith is guiding the recovery after devastating tornadoes last month. And the Pope sparks controversy with comments about parenthood, children, and pets. What his remarks mean from a Catholic perspective. EWTN News In Depth starts now.
Hello, and welcome to EWTN News In Depth. This week marked an important event at the Vatican as Pope Francis welcomed more than 180 ambassadors serving at the Holy See, where he delivered his annual State of the World address. In reviewing his diplomatic activities in 2021, he touched on his major global themes: the pandemic, immigration, climate change, and nuclear arms. From the EWTN Vatican Bureau, Colm Flynn takes us inside this world of Vatican diplomacy.
Earlier this week at the Vatican, Pope Francis gave his annual State of the World address to diplomats from across the globe. It's an opportunity for the Pope to speak directly to government officials representing 87 nations.
In the end, a comprehensive commitment on the part of the international community is necessary so that the entire world population can have equal access to essential medical care and vaccines.
Listening carefully are all ambassadors to the Holy See, who will present the Pope's concerns, his priorities, and message to their country's governments. But why do countries have ambassadors to the Holy See? Well, to find out, you don't have to look far, as dotted all around the Vatican, you'll see an array of flags and bronze plates, marking the various embassies to the Holy See. Ambassador Christopher Trott represents Her Majesty the Queen and the United Kingdom to the Holy See. Why do countries have embassies to the Holy See?
There's a sort of combination of reasons, really. The first and most obvious one is that the Holy See is a state and is a member of the United Nations and is recognised as a member of the family of nations. And between nations you have ambassadors and you have embassies.
Although the Vatican is geographically a small nation, its huge following and enormous network is something that is very appealing to other nations. Ambassador Chiara Porro represents the nation of Australia.
The Holy See is quite unique. I mean, it's obviously one of the smallest states, the smallest state in the world, but it has an incredible international network made up, of course, by the 1.3 billion followers of the Catholic Church, but also in varying degrees through things like the Catholic schooling system, social services, Catholic hospitals. So as an ambassador, it's an incredible opportunity to be able to utilise this network, both to communicate and advance Australia's objectives internationally, but also to obtain information.
Another draw for nations to be connected with the Vatican is that it has papal nuncios, bishops, and missionaries in many parts of the world that other countries find it difficult or even impossible to have a presence in. The Vatican has a presence, and therefore eyes and ears, in almost every corner of the globe. Some of the information the Vatican has can be very valuable to other countries, but it isn't easy to get at. Ambassador Derek Hannon represents the Republic of Ireland to the Holy See. The Vatican, as we know, is famously very secretive and it can move very slowly. So does that make your job quite challenging sometimes?
It doesn't follow the same pattern template as most governments, for example. And as you mentioned yourself, Colm, you know, I was posted in the States, and in DC they practically hand you information on a plate. Here you really have to work for it, you have to ferret around for it. The culture here, I suppose, is one of discretion and flying below the radar. So they're inclined to be tight-lipped until they know you very well, which is usually the time you're ready to go. So that's a challenge.
Another reason countries have embassies and ambassadors to the Holy See, recognising there are over 1.3 billion Catholics in the world, is so that they might be able to, in some way, influence the Pope and the Church's stance on certain geopolitical issues and world events.
The voice of the Vatican, in other words, the Pope himself, carries an awful lot of weight, and faith leaders also speak more directly to individual people than politicians can, and they speak to their hearts instead of just their heads, or speak to both in a way that politicians perhaps can't do.
Can it be a tricky position sometimes when, in some cases, the Vatican stands on certain issues and your government stance can be sometimes completely opposed? Is that a delicate balancing act because you're in the middle?
I think you find as a diplomat, I mean, that's always the case. Each country has their own interests, and the same you could say of the Holy See. And so it's about finding ways to work together.
That's the sort of core part of a diplomat's job, is to try and bridge those differences, or at least to try and explain why those differences exist.
I consider it essential that the European Union arrive at internal cohesion in handling migration movements, just as it did in dealing with the effects of the pandemic.
We hear so much today that the Catholic Church is becoming irrelevant, but yet then again we see countries like Switzerland opening up a brand new embassy to the Holy See. So how do you see the diplomatic role between nations and the Vatican? Is it something that's becoming more important? Is it becoming less important?
Well, I don't think it's becoming less important. I mean, if you look any week at the number of people who call to see the Pope, you know, recently we've had President Macron, we've had former Chancellor Merkel, we've had, of course, President Joe Biden. They're calling to the Holy See because the Holy Father is seen as a statesman, as somebody who doesn't have a particular agenda that he's pushing. It's not a political or economic or social agenda. They see him as an honest broker.
I renew my blessing and offer my heartfelt good wishes for a year of serenity and peace. Thank you.
In Rome, Colm Flynn, EWTN News In Depth.
Here in the U.S., the Pope's ambassador, or Apostolic Nuncio, lives at the Vatican Embassy in Washington, D.C. I had the opportunity to sit down with His Excellency Archbishop Christophe Pierre, who has held nuncio positions around the world. Pope Francis appointed Pierre as nuncio to the U.S. in April of 2016. He joined us on the record. Archbishop Christophe Pierre, it's such a treat to be here with you in the Vatican Embassy in Washington, D.C. Thank you for having us here for this interview.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. You're welcome.
Thank you.
You know that this is the house of the Holy Father.
Yes.
So you should feel at home here.
I definitely do. Maybe a little too much. Well, I want you to tell us about this role you have, Papal Nuncio. What is it?
You know, the Papal Nuncio is essentially the representative of the Holy Father in a particular place, in a country, representing the Pope, mainly with the Catholic Church, you know, and all the components of the Catholic Church. First and foremost, of course, the bishops, but then also the priests, the religious, the lay people, and helping the Pope to be present. You know, the Holy Father has the mission to unite the Catholic Church. You know, he's the successor of the Apostle Peter. So he needs his personal representative to help him to do this, to assume this function. But we have also more political role, if you like. You know, I am like the ambassador of the Pope with the government of this country. So it's a kind of dual role, but always done as a church. You know, it's because the church is not just a country like the others. But it is interesting to know that the Catholic Church, being a church, has always an incidence, a role to play in the building of the world.
Yes.
And we have some contribution to do this. This is why, you know, we keep relationship with the politicians, those who are in charge of the common good. We are part of the diplomatic corps. So it's a quite a complex role, but very interesting one.
Very interesting. Pastoral care and political initiatives to help further your ability to do that.
There is the politics is part of the human reality. You know?
Right, absolutely. And you've done this in 3 different countries.
Well, more than that. But
more than that. Tell me about
actually,
that.
I've been most of my priestly life, you know, I've been a priest for 51 years now.
Beautiful.
But I've been serving the Holy Father in this capacity, first come collaborator of a nuncio, then come as nuncio, for 46 years.
46
in 9
years.
countries, imagine.
That's beautiful. And in this particular role of leadership, though, you've been in Haiti, in Mexico?
Yes. Well, as nuncio, I was appointed first in Haiti 26 years ago, where I stayed 4 years. Then I was sent to Africa again, because I spent a lot of my life in Africa, in Uganda.
Okay.
I spent 8 years and 9 years in Mexico before coming here 5.5 years.
And which was your favorite?
All of them. Of course, you know.
I thought you would say Mexico, but
I always, it's a privilege to be representing the Holy Father. So you are received as, you know, the person representing the Pope, and in each country you discover people, first and foremost, but also beautiful realities, the culture, the life of the church, the struggle of the church, the suffering of the church. So we are called to share everything, and you know, this, whatever the country, poor country, rich country, you know, difficult country, country in war, country in peace, but they are always people, and I always enjoy that.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And bringing that pastoral care is something that we saw with Pope Francis's pontificate in a very unique way during the pandemic. In March of 2020, he decided that he discerned, right, that he would give this blessing, the Urbi et Orbi.
Yes, well, all of us, we have been touched by this moment, you know. That was the beginning of the pandemic, and people were afraid, you know, they were all closed in their homes. There was a lot of, the future looked bleak, and suddenly the Holy Father decided to go alone. You know, on the day where there was a lot of rain, you remember, you know, on St. Peter's Square. Usually St. Peter's Square is full of life, full of people, full of sun and so forth. And that day, that was the night. And he approached, you know, he was basically alone there, you know. Yeah. But the leader of the church, you know, the successor of Peter, that was first and foremost a moment of prayer. And everybody looked at him, you know, and I think we all prayed with him.
In my life, there are 2 moments that marked me and that I think marked the world. For my generation, it's 9/11 and then the pandemic.
Yes, exactly.
And in both of these moments, the church has been there as a leader.
Exactly.
Because of this extraordinary moment that did, in a big way, mark Pope Francis's papacy, it did speak to us about how he is trying to reach the world, trying to reach the peripheries. And we've seen that with all of the travel, right? 50 trips or something like that. What does 22 look like then, looking forward?
You know, it's interesting that from the very beginning, as everybody knows that, he wants to reach the peripheries of isolation, the periphery of suffering, the periphery of sickness, and so forth. Just to reach out the people where they are, you know. And I think this is one of the characteristics of the Pope. So he is already inviting ourselves to go out of our zone of comfort. You know, we are all tempted, you know, to secure our positions, to be happy where we are. And this is the temptation of the world. Actually, in the speech he gave, you know, in this meditation, you know, on the St. Peter's Square, he said that, you know, please, in my prayer, I ask myself to be freed from this temptation to remain, you know, protected. Protection with walls, protections with securities, and so forth. Go out and announce the good news of the world. Our protections is Jesus himself.
That's right. He is everything. I know one of the big initiatives for Pope Francis is this deepening in synodality, this importance of listening. Yes. Is there a kernel of hope that comes in with that for the American church and the global church?
Well, certainly. You know, first and foremost, I am full of hope for the church. There is no doubt about that, you know. The church is bigger than ourselves, you know. And the church is not just a human organizations. We have the tendency, you know, to panic because, you know, our organization is falling apart, you know, at times. We are missing the money, we are missing, you know, the pandemic has been a time of crisis for that, you know. But also sometimes we are missing the personnel and we are fighting between ourselves, you know. There is a polarization in the society which is reflected by the church, all these problems. But on the other hand, you know, I think we should never forget that the church is not just it's a gift from God, you know. And if I am a priest, if you are a lay person committed to the church, it's because you believe that the church is in the hands of the Lord, you know. Yes. So we are all invited to participate to that, and to be, you know, I remember when Pope Benedict started his mission, I am a humble worker in the work of the Lord, you know. And that's what we are. This is why he proposed us, you know, synodality. Maybe this word is not yet fully understood, and I think it's important, especially in this country, to understand it. Synodality is not easy because we have to be together. But unfortunately, you know, we live in a society where it's very difficult to be together, even in politics, you know. Yes. In politics, we are just, you know, divided. And if the divisions which we find in politics is reflected in the church, this is the end of the church. And to be church is to be together, but to be together not just with political means, with the capacity to listen to one another and to listen to the Holy Spirit. You know, that's very important. And to discern. You know, you told me, for example, of some experience of synods, you know, for example, in Germany. Yes. I don't know exactly what's going on in Germany, but there is at times, even here, you know, the temptations, you know, to think that we have to make a different church according to our desires. No, you know, we have to become church in order to evangelize, to announce the gospel.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Our thanks to Archbishop Pierre for taking the time to sit down with us at the embassy. We'll hear again from him in a little bit. You may have heard about that dust-up when the Pope made comments about birth rates, babies, and pets. The Nuncio weighs in on that ahead. But first, EWTN News In Depth travels to the scene of massive weather destruction in the U.S.
Kentucky towns ravaged by historic tornadoes. Now begins the work of recovery, and faith is playing a big role. We've got that story next.
You can look how it looked like. I see all my life was destroyed in 1 second.
Destruction, devastation, and recovery. Picking up the pieces after the deadliest December tornado event ever recorded in the United States. Welcome back to EWTN News In Depth. 93 people were killed when a series of tornadoes swept across Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Tennessee, and Kentucky in mid-December, producing catastrophic damage. Life in the region has been upended, towns wiped out, people with no homes. Reporter Mark Irons traveled to the worst hit state, Kentucky, where he says faith is playing an important part in recovery.
They called it their dream home. Now this couple picks up the pieces of what's left.
Everything is destroyed. Everything was destroyed.
Around 1 a.m. on December 11th, Munga Ramadani says the only warning came from his daughter, who woke him up because she was scared. You were sleeping in here?
Yeah, I was sleeping. I didn't know anything.
You didn't hear anything?
No.
Then the tornado hit with wind speeds of 150 miles per hour.
Wood was falling on us.
As their home was ripped apart around them, Munga, his wife Sango Christina, and their 8 children managed to survive. They were screaming, crying, and praying.
I think God protect us because we pray a lot. That's why we are safe right now, me and my family.
Their neighborhood in Bowling Green, Kentucky was among the hardest hit places by record-breaking tornadoes. 77 people lost their lives in the state. A 2.5-hour drive west of Bowling Green, the small town of Mayfield took a direct hit. 1 month removed from the historic tornadoes, Mayfield, Kentucky is block after block of nothing but rubble. And now the recovery effort underway, and among those helping out, the Catholic Church. St. Joseph Catholic Church has become a bustling aid center.
Clothing, blankets, towels, sheets.
An overflow of donations from all over the country fill the parish hall, and all those who suffered in the storm can pick up what they need.
And some people, they're impacted forever. It's going to take a long time to recover.
Jean Irwin lives in Houston, Texas, but she grew up in Mayfield and went to St. Joseph's. She came home for Christmas and decided to stay and volunteer at the church.
Someone is in need, so you help them. And there's a lot of people who are in need for a variety of reasons. Maybe they don't have a job now. Maybe they were impacted with their house.
In 2017, Jean lived through Hurricane Harvey in Houston. She says the destruction here is even worse, and parts of her hometown unrecognizable.
You don't know where you are because there's no landmarks. Everything's torn down or it's falling down.
The church bell tower was sheared off by devastating winds. But compared with other churches, businesses, and buildings along Broadway in the downtown area, St. Joseph's was mostly unscathed. That was not the case for Resurrection Catholic Church about 70 miles away in Dawson Springs, Kentucky.
The altar was right here, and then we had our chairs over here against that wall there.
Father David Kennedy, the church pastor, remains optimistic despite the destruction.
The Lord will be pleased with what we do to restore this church.
According to the mayor in Dawson Springs, the tornado destroyed 75% of this community. It's home to about 2,500 people. Father Kennedy says he has seen great charity at work within the town.
I think everybody has met a stranger or a neighbor who has helped them. I don't think there's anybody that's been left alone because of this tremendous amount of suffering and destruction.
And one Resurrection parishioner even opened their backyard storage shed as a temporary chapel for Mass to continue.
I broke into tears.
Father Kennedy says this space could be used for the next 2 years as they work to rebuild. The undamaged tabernacle and altar were recovered from the church and moved here after the storm. For those impacted by the tornadoes, it can be hard to make sense of it all. Years ago, Munga and his family fled suffering in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and lived in a refugee camp before finally immigrating to the U.S. and praying for a home of their own.
We feel God bless us because this was our blessing. We pray for so hard to get this house. We pray all the time before we get this house.
The family is still counting their blessings. Their home is gone, but their lives continue on. Munga points out where neighbors just a few houses down were killed in the storm. Father Kennedy says in times like these, Christians can offer their suffering to Christ's.
We unite with Jesus on the cross with all our sufferings and unite to His.
And Catholics like Jean Irwin say living the faith means when other people suffer, it's time to step in.
It's my faith that tells me this is who I am and what I need to do.
Mark Irons, EWTN News in Depth.
Mark joins us now. What an incredible scene. Such devastation, Mark.
It was unbelievable.
What was it like for you going home, right? This is the same neighborhood just a few miles away from your home?
That's right. My home is a few miles away.
My family and friends, thank God, were not impacted, but as you saw, the destruction, in particular in that neighborhood, was just, it was devastation. And I think the surreal thing walking through that neighborhood as you look at these images is that you could see the very defined path that this tornado made, the path of destruction. And the stark reality is there could be a home where people weren't impacted, where people survived, and then just a few feet away, a house moved off its foundation, destruction, and in some cases people did not survive. So that's sort of the reality of these tornadoes, and to see it, yeah, it was shocking.
You never know who it's going to choose. You were explaining to me that there's also other tornado warnings and other moments, but that this was different.
It's not uncommon in that part of the country in Kentucky to have severe weather come through. We have severe thunderstorms, tornado watches, and sometimes warnings. Even when I was home for Christmas, after these waves of storms went through, we had another tornado warning in Bowling Green that you probably didn't hear about, but the destruction was nothing like this. This is nothing short of historic.
So there's a long road to recovery.
That's right.
You were explaining to me that there's so much going on, neighbors helping neighbors, but also a big role that the church is taking.
That's right. Well, I just heard from the Diocese of Owensboro today. That was the diocese that was hardest hit. And between all the residents and businesses and church communities that they're helping, it's going to be about a 4-year road to recovery, at least, they said. At least. So this church in particular that we're looking at in Dawson Springs, the thing about this church is there was concerns after the destruction. Would they even rebuild? Because it's a small community. There's 2,500 people, even smaller Catholic population. They did get the word from the bishop there that they are going to rebuild, so that's a positive sign. But it's going to be a long road to recovery, no doubt.
Well, you always think, where's the money going to come from? You know, a devastated community can't help itself. So hopefully we'll see some kind of response from people around the country.
The response has been great, and they've got it, like you say, from all over the country. And a lot of it's coming. It's just how do they use those resources now, and that's what they're trying to figure out.
Well, we'll be praying for them, and I hope you'll have an update for us soon.
I will.
Thank you, Mark.
He has nothing like against pets and dogs and cats, but don't replace the children with cats and dogs. That's it. That's very simple.
Pet ownership is up, birth rates are down. We'll explore that papal side comment that got so much attention next.
Hello and welcome to Hallow.
And a talk with the founder of one of the most popular Catholic apps, Hallow. His take on how it can deepen your faith.
It was a papal comment that sparked a media storm. Speaking about St. Joseph and parenthood during his general audience last week, Pope Francis talked about the spiritual value of adoption while discussing St. Joseph as the adoptive father of Jesus Christ. And while commenting on the global decline in birth rates, he made this now controversial remark.
Tante coppie non hanno dei figli perché non vogliono.
Many couples do not have children because they do not want to. Or they have just one because they do not want any more. But they have 2 dogs, 2 cats. Yes, dogs and cats take the place of children.
Pope Francis called it a denial of parenthood that takes away our humanity. After the comments at the general audience, reaction from pet lovers and animal rights groups on social media was immediate and angry. Others took offense, interpreting the remarks as insensitive to those who struggle with infertility. But the Pope isn't wrong about the numbers. While studies show pet ownership is up, global birth rates are down. In the United States, the birth rate has been on the decline for 6 consecutive years, according to the National Center for Health Statistics. Birth rates have dropped an average of 2% a year. In 2020, it was a 4% drop, the decline largely blamed on the pandemic. That's roughly 100,000 fewer babies born in 2020 compared to 2019. A similar decline in births is happening in the European Union. About 100,000 fewer births in 2020 compared to 2019. Let's talk now about this media tempest from the standpoint of Catholic social teaching on marriage, children, and adoption. We're joined by a passionate parenthood and adoption advocate, Catholic writer, thinker, and commentator, Lee Sneed, a fellow at the Catholic Association. Lee, it's so great to have you here with us. These criticisms of Pope Francis's comments, they seem to ignore the dropping birth rates and the growing foster care crisis here in the U.S., which has been aggravated by the pandemic. I know you've talked about the opioid crisis. As an adoptive parent yourself, how did you interpret Pope Francis's comments?
Well, Montse, I'm always happy when you and anyone, and especially the Holy Father, brings the public attention to adoption and foster care. And, obviously the people, the declining birth rates and people not as being as open to life as maybe, we are called to be. I did see that overall, this was a very positive thing. And the one thing I really liked about his comments was he talks about the risk. And I think a lot of people focus so much on that when they think about adoption and the possibilities of, what could be, especially if you're thinking about an older child, a child who suffered trauma or something. And he reminds us that whether you have a biological child or you adopt, there's always a risk. I mean, the child is a stranger that we welcome. It's it's that kind of unbidden hospitality that we're called to. So I think overall, I thought he was very honest, and I thought his comments were very reassuring.
I love that. It was reassuring for me as well, because that riskiness is something that stops us from being open to our neighbor, and being distant during the pandemic has really aggravated that. From the perspective of church teaching, how are we supposed to consider the issue of children versus pets that Pope Francis brought up? Let's take a quick listen to Archbishop Christophe Pierre's comment on that first.
It's just a kind of, basic wisdom, We live in a society where a lot of people have difficulty to have children today, and for many reasons. Some reasons are valid, but some other reasons are not. There are also so many children who are in need to be adopted, to receive a caring and a good family. So I think the Holy Father, he's fully in his role to say that.
Lee, what's your take on this?
I think that my children would probably be, happier if I was more interested in pet parenthood. But I think that the underlying premise, I think that if you busy yourself with any sort of, and I'm sorry, but I know that your personal relationships with pets are very real, and I have had dogs and I've loved them and I experience that unconditional love that I get from them. But it's still, a purchase. It's a material investment, just like be a career or education. And I think that it's possible that you can put so much time and energy into those things that you put off parenthood. And I think that that's either people get complacent in their role as, a potential parent, or they, or that you run out the biological clock. So I think that there are those dangers there. I wish that the sort of waters hadn't been muddied with the discussion about pets, because I think pets are great. And also I really would like the language to change with pets too. I don't like the idea that adopt is often, because my ears always perk up whenever I hear the word adopt or adoption, and it's almost always about animals and not children. And so I wish that language would change.
A lot of that has to do with fear, Lee. I know that that's something that has been part of the discussion. And in his remarks, Pope Francis kind of walked into that, talking about our own orphanhood. He said, because we live in an age of notorious orphanhood, don't we? It's curious. Our civilization is something of an orphan, and this orphanhood can be felt. May St. Joseph, who took the place of the real Father God, help us to understand how to resolve this sense of orphanhood that is so harmful to us today. What do you think he meant by that orphanhood?
I think that he meant, that we're living, a lot of people without any idea of, God the Father, and not in any kind of spiritual parenthood either. I mean, even especially like I mentioned with the COVID crisis and the isolation that came with that, we're missing out for opportunities for that spiritual parenthood between friends and families. And I think that is an orphan, but that's also because I think we're not called to live, or people aren't answering the call to live as Christians with God the Father. And through St. Joseph, of course, we understand that our relationship as a Christian person is based on adoption. The line of King David is Christ through Joseph, not through biology. So I think that that's part of it. I think the idea that we're orphans, I think that calls to mind a sort of a visceral loneliness, an abandonment, and also just a sense of feeling lost.
And feeling lost is something that I think we can all relate to, but in finding that spiritual adoptive line to Jesus Christ, right? Knowing that we are adopted sons and daughters of God by virtue of that is something that should be reassuring. Do you think that that fear and that lack of understanding that we're adopted is something that stops others from wanting to adopt?
I think so. And I think that, I think people don't like what's not common to them. I think that, outside of your lived experience, we're lucky here in South Bend that adoption is so common that my son growing up would always sort of be surprised when someone wasn't adopted. And it's through either foster care, a lot of people in our community foster children, and so many people have either both biological and adopted children or just solely adopted children. I think people often follow the promises of, contemporary fertility medicine that, promises sort of to give you everything you want. And people want to see themselves reflected back in their children because it's what they grew up doing, especially if they're a biological offspring of their own parents. But the truth of the matter is, you see it in your child, no matter where, they came from, where their biological beginnings were, because what they become is what you've made of them in your own family.
And we see that in your beautiful boys. Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you, Montse.
Top headlines are next in the Week in Review.
They know that they are loved and that we're going to be there with them, not just in the short term, but as long as is necessary.
Horrific fires bring tragedy to several communities. What the Catholic Church is doing to help after multiple fatalities at an apartment complex in New York. And stepping up to provide relief through Catholic Charities after wildfires decimate whole communities in Colorado.
Tragic fire news tops the Week in Review. Raging fires devastated two U.S. communities thousands of miles away from each other. In Colorado, wildfires sparked mass evacuations. And in New York, a community is reeling after a deadly apartment complex fire. The fire in the high-rise in the Bronx broke out this past Sunday. Fire officials say an electric space heater sparked a fire in a duplex unit. Smoke then quickly flooded the 19-story apartment building, aided by the fact that the door to the apartment and the stairwell to the 15th floor were left open even though they were supposed to close automatically. Father Eric Cruz, director of Catholic Charities in the Bronx, was at the scene as firefighters tackled the flames.
Seeing the faces of children, what's going on, difficult, total confusion, a little overwhelming to them, but certainly the parents in shock, just needing an embrace, someone with whom to speak, to vent, to just come and just look in our eyes and seek. You just felt the hunger and the thirst. You felt this pain.
The fire took the lives of 17 people and left dozens homeless. Almost all were of Gambian or West African descent. 8 of the victims were children, including a 2-, 5-, and 6-year-old. Father Cruz says he shared in the heartbreak of those families.
If you're a person of faith, it's so natural, isn't it, to hear the question, why? Why? My children are gone. My wife is gone. There was an entire family that perished in this fire. Being able to be there with them. I was asked, why? That question, where was God? And you have to admit, my own humanity and all of us, and honestly, I can't give you an answer. I can't, because I share that consternation. It's very human, isn't it, to feel the pain and the anguish and even the frustration. But then the realization that the fact that we're here together in this moment, here is God. We will never forget, we will never abandon you, you will never walk alone. We are a human family with the same Creator, God and Father.
Father Cruz says Catholic Charities reached out to each family impacted by the fire to assess their needs for housing, financial aid, counseling, and more. He also says the response from the local community has been overwhelming, but also from those throughout the city and neighboring states. Across the country in Colorado, communities have been decimated by fast-moving wildfires. The day before New Year's Eve, a wildfire swept through more than 1,000 homes and structures just northwest of Denver. That fire being blamed for at least one death. 115-mile-per-hour winds quickly fanned the flames, making it impossible for fire crews to contain it. Tens of thousands of people evacuated the area, many with just the clothes on their backs, lucky to be alive. The Catholic Church again quickly responded.
We've been manning the table at the Disaster Assistance Center all this week. We've been there 10 hours a day. And as the people come and talk and look and see what we can provide, we're there for them. The resources that we have at the table are where to find food, shelter, clothing, medicine. We help with gift cards. Is it tough to hear sometimes? You bet. Many of our volunteers hear these stories and they break down and they cry along with the families that have experienced the loss, and it's groundbreaking to hold each other up in prayer. It's wonderful to see.
The Archdiocese of Denver has also provided funding for the victims, and parishes are taking up second collections for those impacted. Deacon George says donations help families fill in the gaps where FEMA and insurance fall short. If you would like to help those impacted by the Bronx apartment fire, you can visit catholiccharities.ny.org/Bronx Fire Aid. And to help those affected by wildfires in Colorado, you can make a donation by visiting ccdenver.org. Extreme weather patterns are contributing to the severity of weather-related disasters, like the Colorado wildfires and the tornado outbreak we told you about earlier. The 7 hottest years ever recorded were the last 7 years, according to the European Union's Climate Monitoring Service. And those temperatures create conditions that make weather more severe. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration reported this week that there were 20 weather and climate disasters in the United States in 2021, including historic deep freezes, heat waves, droughts, hurricanes, tornadoes, and wildfires. Last year marked the nation's second consecutive year with 20 or more billion-dollar disasters, with a total economic toll of $145 billion. And there's a real hit in the wallet for U.S. consumers. Inflation has hit a 39-year high, according to new numbers released this week by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Prices have jumped 7% in the last 12 months. The squeeze has been especially felt at the gas pump and in the grocery store. The Federal Reserve plans multiple interest rate hikes this year to help fight inflation. A major Supreme Court ruling on Thursday striking down the Biden administration's COVID vaccine or testing mandate for companies with more than 100 employees. By a vote of 6-3, conservative justices said the mandate to require more than 80 million workers to be vaccinated or mask and test weekly was unacceptable, an unacceptable encroachment into workers' lives. The ruling undercuts the White House's plan to address the pandemic on the federal level, but still permits private sector businesses to establish their own vaccine requirements. The court did allow a more limited mandate, which requires healthcare workers be vaccinated at facilities receiving federal money. On a medical first announcement this week in Baltimore, where doctors transplanted a pig heart into a 57-year-old Maryland man who was ineligible for a human heart transplant. Patient David Bennett knew the procedure was highly experimental, but he had no other medical option. Though it's too soon to know how long the operation will prolong Bennett's life, it's a historic development in a decades-long attempt to use animal organs for life-saving transplants. Doctors at the University of Maryland Medical Center used a heart from a genetically altered pig. Changes were made in the pig's body chemistry to reduce the chances the human body would reject its organs. There's an acute shortage of available human organs, and about a dozen Americans die every day waiting for transplants. Researchers hope this experiment will help open a new supply of replacement organs. Up next, deepening your connection with Christ through the #1 Catholic app. We'll explore the faith journey of the man who created it. And the joyous music of celebration in the Sistine Chapel.
We'll take you to a very special baptism ceremony when we return. Making time to pray. It's an important part of our Catholic life, but it can be difficult sometimes with the distractions of work, parenting, school, and more. But a new app has launched to help guide you through prayer. Alessandro Di Santo is a co-creator of the app. He shares his faith journey behind making this #1 Catholic app. Alessandro, thank you for taking the time to share your story with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Montse.
Of course. You left a promising career in finance after graduating from Notre Dame to start this now very popular app, Hallow. What led you to take this leap of faith?
Well, honestly, the very short answer is prayer. But I think each of us, which is obviously a little bit obvious, but the the founding team really had, of which I'm only one member, really had kind of two sets of experiences. Mine was, I was working 7 days a week, 90-plus-hour work weeks on Wall Street, and was really just overwhelmed with the stress of everyday life. And it was in looking for peace that I originally found my way to secular meditation through the recommendation of friends, which has really become popular in recent time, apps like Headspace and Calm. And in that space of creating kind of a little quiet in life, these much deeper questions related to vocation and, stopping to think, have you ever stopped to think what God wants in your life, led me down the path of discerning, how do we figure out those questions of discernment? How do we ask God what he wants us to do with our lives? The other half of the group went through your classic falling away from faith into atheism, agnosticism out of high school and college. And for them, this journey in prayer was really about asking the question, does God exist? And if so, how do I get to know him?
And how does my life change, right?
Exactly. I think we talk a lot about you're supposed to be able to talk to God. And if you can do that, then he must be real. And so for that part of the group, this idea of figuring out if God was real. So on the one side, this spiritual question of how do we figure out if God is real? And on the other half, assuming that he is real, how do we figure out what he wants us to do with our lives? So that transformed each of us individually. And we ultimately left our jobs to create a tool to help other people go through similar experiences.
It's fantastic, and it's been a great experience so far, so I hear. You mentioned these two apps, Headspace and Calm, that are promoted as tools for mindfulness and to help with anxiety, something we all see with the pandemic, right? But how is Hallow then different?
Yeah, so when we think about, I think meditation is one of these words that means a lot of different things to different people. And I think one of the tragedies over the past, couple decades in the West is that meditation has really become synonymous with Eastern spiritual practices. But there's actually a 2,000-plus year tradition of prayerful meditation within the church. The Catechism talks deeply about the different types of prayer, of which meditation is one, contemplation is another. And, when we think of mindfulness, there's usually these two things that are incorporated into the definition. One is being in the moment, being fully present and aware, which is a good thing. The second thing is an attitude of detachment or non-judgment. And that's something that as Catholics and Christians, we tend to struggle with. And so when we talk about the difference between Catholic meditation and secular meditation, it's really about finding peace in the moment, because the present moment is the only moment in which we can experience Christ, right? We have to be present in order to hear his voice. If we think about kind of in the Old Testament, 1 Kings chapter 19, where Elijah goes up to the mountain to listen to God's voice. He has to listen in the quiet to hear the voice. But really, in Catholic meditation, it's a outward journey to get to understand what Christ is calling us towards. Whereas in secular meditation, it's really this inward focused process. And so that is one of the main distinctions I would draw on the outward focus towards relationship with Christ and understanding his will versus just being purely inwardly focused.
Right, encounter with Christ and then moving with that and letting that move you into society. Then what would you say when someone says to you, well, isn't it about getting off of our phones and not spending more time on them to be able to encounter Christ? How do you respond to that movement to disconnect?
Yeah, it's a great question. We talk about it with parents all the time, with pastors. I think we are in a world in which technology exists. And I think, like anything else, technology is a tool that can obviously either be used for virtuous or not so virtuous purposes. I think what we're really trying to do is help us rewire our relationship with technology to help us realize that it can be used as a tool to deepen our relationship with Christ. The main experience of the app is audio guided in nature. So it's almost technology without technology, in that you choose what you want to pray about, how long you want to pray, you press play, and then you close your eyes and really focus again on that outward relationship. So we put the phone away to better rewire that experience. The second thing I would say about that is, in ministry, we often talk about meeting people where they are. And I think especially for those people that are most in need, again, leaving the 99 to find the one sheep.
Yes.
People are definitely on their phones, and it's definitely causing a lot of anxiety. And so to be able to reach them in the places where they're spending time to help them kind of come back to the flock and recenter on their relationship with Christ is really at the center of what we're trying to do.
And it really is in line with what the Holy Father wants us to do, reaching people and just showing up, right? What's the one thing that you want people to take away when they get your app?
I think the number one thing is that prayer can often be intimidating, but we're trying to make it accessible. We all have a scriptural call to pray without ceasing, and that, I personally, is a super intimidating task. But the app is really designed to help you realize and learn ways in a really low-stress way to incorporate prayer into different aspects of your life, whether it's starting your day with an offering, whether it's an Angels at Noon, or things like focusing on the virtues, love, joy, hope, forgiveness in your relationships with one another, in your relationships with family, whether you're dealing with stress and anxiety. The app is really designed to help whatever you're going through, whatever you want to focus on, finding a way to incorporate prayer into that experience.
Another fantastic tool for us. Alessandro, so great to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. God bless.
God bless you. And finally today, a tradition has returned to the Vatican, halted last year because of the pandemic. The Sistine Chapel baptisms are our images of the week.
Sofia Maria Letizia, io te battesso nel nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo.
Following a tradition started by St. John Paul II in 1981, Pope Francis baptized babies last Sunday on the Feast of the Baptism of the Lord. 16 infants, all children of Vatican employees, received the sacrament this year, a year after Francis was forced to cancel the annual event due to COVID-19. The pontiff asked the parents and godparents to guard the children's Christian identity and to make a daily commitment to help it grow. Throughout the ceremony, the singing of the Sistine Chapel choir vied with the babies' cries. The Pope told the parents to let them sing out like an orchestra and not to worry about baby noises. The Feast of the Baptism of the Lord commemorates Jesus' baptism in the Jordan River by St. John the Baptist. Pope Francis called it the basis of the whole Christian life, the gateway to life in the Spirit. And that does it for this edition of EWTN News In Depth. I'm Montse Alvarado. Next week at this time, we'll have special pro-life programming following EWTN's coverage of the annual March for Life events in Washington. Make sure you tune into that too. We'll be back in 2 weeks. See you then.